Okay, so just to recap, we are currently breaking down the different voter classes in America. We just went through the elites. Wow, what a fun time that was. Next, we have the upper class, and the upper class is pretty much just like the millionaires and billionaires. They vote however their business will benefit. Next, we have the upper middle class. That would be the doctors and lawyers and engineers and senior managers. Those are the upper middle class, and they can be broken down into two very distinct groups. And this is where the American people really diverge.
First, we have the upper middle class Republicans, and these guys are pretty black and white with their politics. They're generally highly educated, and they have a firm grip on conservative economics. Many of them work in the manufacturing and production industries. They employ blue-collar workers, and Republican policies are not only good for their business, but good for their employees too, and I'll get to that later. They tend to work in professions where limited government interference is beneficial for their economic growth. And with a belief system based on meritocracy, they see the conservative policy platform as the most sensible.
Which leads me to my next group, my people, the upper middle class Democrats. And these are the people that really pushed me out of the Democratic Party and into the independent category, because these people are frauds. Not intentionally. I was a fraud my entire 20s, because the entire time I voted Democrat, I believed that I was on the side of the good guys. I believed that I was helping the underdog. Tell them, Kamala.
We are the underdog.
These guys are different. These guys don't have any motive to vote Democrat other than being a good person and having a good heart. And to explain the upper middle class, I'd like to introduce you to a fictional character that I've invented, Logan. Logan is an upper middle class Democrat. He's a marketing manager, just like me. During COVID, Logan kept his apartment in Seattle, and Logan worked from home in his underwear. While Logan was working from home in his underwear, he would say things like, yeah, man, I just vote Democrat because it's the right thing to do. You know what I mean, dude? Like, I might have to wait an extra month or two to buy those VR goggles that I really want because my taxes went up, but just knowing that my extra money, that little bit of extra money went towards people less fortunate than I, it makes the wait worthwhile. And while this well-meaning dude gets points for thinking he's on the right side of history, and while we can commend Logan for working from home during COVID and for tweeting about voting Democrat, Logan sent that tweet in his boxers while working from home at his safe tech job. This is where the Democratic Party really lost me. I'm practically crying right now because this is really upsetting what I'm about to say. What upper middle class Democrats didn't seem to pay attention to during COVID was that 22 million Americans lost their jobs. And 50 million Americans, including children, were food insecure, meaning they didn't know if they were going to eat dinner that night. And most of those jobs that were lost belonged to these guys, the working class. Factory workers, warehouse workers, coal miners, all were hit by significant job loss during COVID. And the only person that seemed to care was him. Donald Trump. Donald Trump really wanted to reopen the economy during COVID, and the Democrats refused to allow it. And I'm not saying that they had bad reason to do it. The CDC said social distance. But the Republicans... But the Republicans in Congress were begging the Democrats to reopen the economy during COVID, saying things like, please, let these guys go back to work. They have families to feed. Their kids are going to bed hungry. The stimulus checks are not coming fast enough. Open the economy. Let these guys go back to work. Social distance the elderly and the immunocompromised. Keep them home, keep them safe, but let these guys go back to work. And the Democrats shut it down every single time. These people were barely scraping by before COVID.
80% of blue-collar workers were living paycheck to paycheck.
They had no savings to live on, and they had families to feed. And Logan would say things like, oh, you guys just want to protect your millionaire and billionaire friends. The Republicans want to open the economy because the business owners don't want to lose revenue, which is somewhat true. But the businesses that were getting impacted during COVID were not tech companies like Logan's gaming app company, those jobs were all safe. The jobs that were being lost were manual labor jobs. Factories, assembly line workers, forklift operators.
All of these working class jobs were
gone by the millions. And people were starving. And so Logan would say things like, yeah, man, I get a little bit depressed social distancing and working from home, but it's just the right thing to do, My Nana's 89 years old and we have to protect her. And that's true. Of course, we had to protect the immunocompromised during COVID. I'm not saying that I'm against social distancing.
All I'm trying to say is that this man had to make a choice between the elderly retired population, mostly, and these guys. That had to be one of the most painstaking decisions that any president has ever had to face. I can't imagine being put in that position.
After COVID hit, about 13 million children lived in food insecure houses. And the saddest part of this whole thing is that COVID wasn't the first time that the Democrats abandoned the working class. The Democrats have been stomping all over the working class for decades, passing policies that would just shovel manufacturing jobs overseas, leaving them out of legislation.
When Obamacare was passed, these guys, who were already living paycheck to paycheck, saw their insurance premiums go up. Why? Why was the working class left out of this legislation? Is it because they don't vote Democrat? That is horrific.
And that's why so many of these people, no matter what comes out of Trump's mouth, will pull together and support him. It's because they have bigger things to worry about than being called a childless cat lady. And that's where the Democrats lost me.
So it's not a small endorsement, it's a big deal.
And a lot of her fans are too young to vote and too young to buy concert tickets and don't have revenue streams to afford the concert tickets. So Taylor Swift's fandom is made up of her fans and their parents, their moms and their dads. And if there were ever a campaign and a candidacy Taylor made for a push for girl dads.
Let's review the girl dad jobs that were lost during COVID, shall we? Manufacturing, 1.4 million jobs. Construction, 1.1 million jobs. Transportation and warehousing, 570,000 jobs. Retail, 2.3 million jobs. And mining and logging, 55,000 jobs.
And it's so important, I think, to the people who are going to be consuming that Taylor Swift endorsement, including those fathers of 8-year-old girls.
7 million Americans got lifted off of food stamps under the Trump administration. 2 million blue-collar jobs were added to the U.S. economy. And I pray that when little 8-year-old girls from working class America ask their dad if they're voting for Kamala Harris because of Taylor Swift, I hope that that father has the heart to tell his daughter it's complicated instead of telling her the truth, which is that under Donald Trump, we could afford to buy our own food. And during the Biden administration, I had to go into a room and shut the door and cry when you handed me your Christmas list. That was a reality for some Americans. So when I look at these people, I don't see racist MAGA Trumpers. I see girl dads who just want to feed their family. It breaks my heart. I hate that I had to leave the Democratic Party. I really thought that we were the good guys. I thought we represented hope and joy. Thankfully, the Trump administration did everything they could to keep these families from starving during COVID, like the Paycheck Protection Program, which provided forgivable small loans to businesses to help them keep their workers employed, which was a lifeline for many small businesses during COVID.
And guys, this was a Mitch McConnell program. It doesn't get any more Republican than Mitch McConnell. And guys, pause your screens for a minute and just review this list of policies and programs that the Trump administration implemented to help the working class. As a Democrat, I had no idea. MSNBC never told me that a huge portion of the Trump administration was dedicated to job training and education and apprenticeships for blue-collar workers who were losing their jobs to technology and AI and alternative energy. These people matter to me. In the past, I could barely see them because the liberal media doesn't talk about them ever. But they matter to me, and they should matter to you as well. And I spent a full day digging on the Biden administration's actions for the working class, and the only thing he did was expand on one of Trump's job training programs. Everything else was his Made in America program, which I'll talk about later, but basically, he barely lifted a finger for these people. I thought that a vote for the Democrats was a vote for the underdog and for the people that needed help chasing the American dream in this country. And I didn't realize that I was leaving out millions of Americans who need help. It's wrong.
Kamala Harris is painting the Trump administration. And guys, please, I'm not trying to convince anyone to vote for Trump. I'm just saying that you're being lied to.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression.
The country had just come out of the COVID pandemic when Trump left office, so that is a misleading statement.
Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs.
So the Trump administration actually created hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs. They only disappeared during COVID because the Democrats shut down the economy and refused to open it again. It's her fault that the jobs were lost.
We had the greatest economy. We got hit with a pandemic.
That was an exaggeration, but not a lie.
And the Democrats will claim things like,
we have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I have been vice president.
So that is actually just a straight up lie. According to factcheck.org and PolitiFact, 2/3 of those jobs that Kamala just mentioned were bounce back jobs that were created under Trump.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but take it away, Donald.
But the only jobs they got were bounce back jobs. These were jobs bounce back, and it bounced back and it went to their benefit. But I was the one that created them. They know it, and so does everybody else.
But of course, the lies went in both directions.
We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. The worst inflation we've ever had. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country.
The Biden economy did not face the worst inflation in our nation's history. Here is a list of presidents who had it worse. Although he does make the top 10, and supply chain shortage after COVID had a lot to do with it, but Republicans would argue that some of Biden's policies did make inflation worse, such as the American Rescue Plan, which injected trillions of dollars into the economy. Economists argue that this excess spending overheated the economy, contributing to inflation. So more money in the economy, not enough supply from the supply chain. And of course, that creates an economic crisis.
But our current unemployment rate under Biden is around 4.2%, which is pretty good. In recent years, it was hovering around 6% for a really long time. 4.2%, though, in a population of 300 million people is still 12 million people unemployed. The difference between Donald Trump's 3.5 and Biden's 4.2 is 2.1 million jobs.
And if you take a look at this chart here from our government website, it looks like Trump created a lot of momentum, lowering the unemployment, and then the Biden administration messed it all up and unemployment started to rise again, seeing a very sharp rise in unemployment in the last couple of years.
Job growth after the bounce back jobs have been put into the economy started to disappear in certain sectors. Specifically, guess where? Among the working class. Oh my God. But there is a catch, Democrats. There is a catch. I will bring it back. Listen to Trump talk about it during the debate.
Let me just tell you, they lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs this last month. They're all leaving. They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China. They're building these massive plants, and they think they're going to sell their cars into the United States because of these people.
Kamala Harris is shaking her head, saying that's not true. I looked it up. I read about it, and the only lie that Donald Trump told was when he said that 10,000 manufacturing jobs had disappeared in the last month. According to BLS.gov, manufacturing jobs have been declining all year. And in the month of August alone, 25,000 manufacturing jobs were shed in a single month under Biden.
Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs.
He didn't lose manufacturing jobs. COVID hit, and they all came back, and now they're leaving under the Democrats. But why? Stick around, Democrats. The pendulum shall swing again. This is Swing Voter Central. I looked into it. China is building factories in Mexico, that is a fact. But why? Why is China building factories in Mexico, and where are the manufacturing jobs going? Welcome back, Democrats. Turns out, the cost of domestic production has gone up, causing factories to move their operations outside of the United States because of the Trump tariffs on China. Dun, dun, dun. Listen to Kamala talk about it during the debate.
My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
First of all, that was not exactly a lie, what she said, but it was, again, misleading. That $4,000 estimate that Americans stand to lose, that was just an estimate by one or two economists. Now, economists agree we will lose money as Americans on this deal. Most economists are estimating between $800 and $1,200. But what kills me about the statement that you just watched is the audacity of Kamala Harris to wag her finger at Trump about the Trump sales tax because the Biden administration maintained that tax. And when jobs started leaving the United States because of that tax, they did nothing to combat this problem. They did nothing about it. They just stood there twiddling their thumbs. Why? Kamala Harris talks about the Trump tariffs a lot during the debate, but she did verbal gymnastics when the moderators asked her this question.
Vice President Harris, I do want to ask for your response, and you heard what the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century, which means focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having on the short end of the stick in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet. Thank you, President Xi, exclamation point, when we know that Xi was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
And if Kamala Harris knew about this issue in depth, she would have had an answer for you, because there is an answer. And it's not a bad answer either. It's a pretty good answer. The Trump tariffs were part of a broader effort by Trump and Biden to minimize our dependence on China. Biden's program, I think, was called the Made in America program. And under this program, he maintained the tariffs on Chinese goods to increase production and manufacturing in the United States. Because during COVID, we were forced to face how dependent we are on Chinese production. Have you heard of the chip shortage? Probably sounds familiar. Let me tell you all about it. During the COVID pandemic, Chinese factories shut down, and our supply chain was cut off. Particularly our supply chain of these semiconductors. These little squares are used to make chips like graphics cards, CPUs, memory cards, and so much more. These chips power almost all modern electronics. Smartphones, computers, TV remotes, everything you can think of, household appliances, they all need chips in order to build these little processors and graphics cards. And when our supply to Chinese chips was cut off, our economy tanked. This was one of the catalysts that sparked the inflation that we're dealing with right now. So it's not entirely Joe Biden's fault that we are experiencing inflation. It's a multitude of factors. Some of them are the Biden administration's fault, but the chip shortage was part of that. We learned during COVID that we need to establish independence from China's manufacturing. China's not even our ally. China's our adversary. And the fact that we are so dependent on them, not just in chips, but so many other supplies, I'll get into it in a second, that it's a little bit scary that during a global crisis, if China's not delivering, America suffers. We can't have that. And so Trump's response was these Trump sales tax that Kamala talks about that placed a tariff on Chinese imports and made it so expensive for companies in America to buy Chinese that it basically forced them to buy American because it's cheaper to buy American. These new policies, and it's not a bad policy. The Biden administration continued this policy. If Kamala knew that, she would have had a good answer to that question. There's a good reason why the Biden administration continued that policy, but she didn't know that. The Trump sales tax did encourage manufacturers to start producing in the United States. But unfortunately, for some reason, the Trump tariffs included many materials that American factories need in order to produce in America. Therefore, they moved their factories to Mexico. So when manufacturing jobs started jumping ship this year, the Biden administration didn't do anything to stop it. And it sounds like Kamala Harris doesn't have a plan.
They plan. Let's talk about our plans and let's compare the plans. I have a plan.
Does Kamala want to cancel the Trump sales tax? I don't know. I don't know what her plan is. She hasn't provided one. The only person that seems to have a plan is Trump. What is Trump's plan, you ask? More tariffs!
But we're not going to let that. We'll put tariffs on those cars so they can't come into our country because they will kill the United Auto Workers.
Basically, what Trump is saying at his rallies and on his website and whatever is that his plan, he's going to say, okay, factories, set up your business in Mexico, build your products in Mexico. But when you import those finished products into America, those cars, for example, I'm going to put a 100% tax to make it so expensive for you to import those cars that it's cheaper to build the cars in America. Trump is not friends with China, like Kamala Harris accuses him of being. She's always like, he loves dictators and he loves President Xi. Guys, I don't know that that's true. Trump is the only one that's been duking it out with China on behalf of the American people. Listen to Kamala Harris talk about this issue during the debate.
My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump sales tax. Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
Now that I know all about the issues, the debate makes sense to me. I'm not like, he was rambling. No, actually, he was making sense. She was rambling.
When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
Her answer was 5 minutes of distractions and mental gymnastics. But I like Kamala Harris. Maybe I'll still vote for her. So I'm going to play this response, but I'm going to help her distract you. Are you ready?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid, so that those young families can afford to buy a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America, to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut. I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. I'm the only person on this stage who has a plan that is I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an home. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing.